Hello, and welcome to Dr. Russo's video lecture. Here today, we're talking about positivist versus Marxist theory of criminology and exploring that theoretical perspectives in crime studies. So, when we look at the overall view of the criminology theories, we can look at the diverse perspectives on crime causation, understanding the positivist and the Marxist theories is really crucial in analyzing the root causes of criminal behavior. This is where positivists look at genetics and the chemical biological makeup of what are precursors to somebody being a criminal. Marxist theories looks at the societal, the justice warriors, if you will, the inequalities in our society to explain away criminal behavior. In reviewing criminology theories, there of course are a lot, right? We can start with the classical criminology theories, but we can go all the way up to the contemporary theories, which also include both the positivist and the Marxist. When we look at criminology theories, they encompass various explanations for criminal behavior, ranging from the individual traits all the way to the societal factors. This is by far not even close to a detailed explanation. But when we start looking at really the significance of understanding theories, you really can, for the modern times, look at both of these and the perspectives in helping to address the complexities of what we say are criminal behaviors, the criminogenics, if you will, and then developing effective intervention strategies. So, what are some of these strategies? Well, you can look at from the chem bio, the positivist perspective, can be, of course, everything from giving them pharmaceuticals like, say, antipsychotics, obsessive compulsive disorder type mood stabilizers, but then also therapies, right? And then when you move into the Marxist perspectives, that is looking at, well, balancing the social injustices, the inequalities in our societies. Some of these are, of course, perceived, right? So when we start looking at the overall evolution of criminology theories, over time they've evolved and they've really started to incorporate a lot of even the older theoretical frameworks by offering more unique insights into the causes as well as some insight into prevention of crime. So when we start to go back to the 1970s and 80s with, say, like broken windows theory, social learning theory, and even the routine activities theories, we've seen a lot of those theoretical frameworks either overlap or morph into what we now can say are, okay, more contemporary theoretical frameworks. But let's focus on the positivist theory of crime. So, the positivist theory offers scientific explanations for those criminal behaviors, and it really does emphasize biological and even environmental influences. Now, when we're talking about environmental influences, we are not talking about soil and water. We're talking about where an individual, say, lives, what kind of social construct. And so again, you're going to start to see where, okay, I thought we were talking biological and chemical. So why are we talking about, let's see, characteristics such as both parents in the house, the demographics, religious affinity, social economic statuses, so on and so forth. So the drug use or alcohol use, the precursors to predispositions of what we could say are criminal behaviors. And that includes domestic violence. And a domestic violence doesn't necessarily have to be that the a parent was an abuser. The parent could have actually been a victim and suffered trauma, and yet the environmental influence on, say, a child would be very different than if they were abusers, but maybe they were a victim, and so therefore, but it could be both, right? So it affects the child in certain ways that it ends up being, yes, an environmental influence. Maybe the parent who suffered domestic violence as the victim was not capable of carrying out the duties and the responsibilities of a parent, therefore not abusing, but maybe neglecting and maybe not being able to teach the child modeled behaviors other than to fend for themselves, which would then tend to lead into petty crime, theft, embezzlement, that type of stuff. So then we look at, okay, here's the explanation. It suggests that the factors beyond the individual's control, genetics, social environment, as I just got done explaining, these all contribute to criminal behavior. We see that in a lot of juveniles, that the juveniles in the juvenile probation and criminal justice system are not necessarily criminals by choice. They are a product of the environment, but they also may be a product of genetics, that there might be some issue. And we can go through. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a licensed counselor to get into those genetics, but we do know that, we see a lot more children suffering from, say, autism or bipolar disorder, ADHD. And so with these become behavioral problems, whether these are actually diagnosed, and many go undiagnosed until well into their teens, and they become, say, involved with juvenile probation system, that psychological or psychosexual evaluations and assessments are completed. And then it opens the door for, do you know that your son or your daughter has the precursors to these genetic disorders, or that it's identified that it is a environmental issue. So when we look at key factors and assumptions, positivist theories assume that criminal behavior is influenced by biological, psychological, or even social factors. And this is really the challenging the notion of rational choice theory. Now I want you to go look at rational choice theory and see where maybe there are differences or similarities between the rational choice theory and the positivist theories. And you'll be surprised on how close some of these really are. And as an earlier slide and a comment is that we've seen a lot of these theoretical frameworks evolve over decades. Now, there is evidence supporting the positivist theory. Scientific studies that have been completed reveal that there's correlations between the genetic predispositions, brain chemistry imbalances, and of course the criminal behavior associated with that. And that really does support that perspective. Now, this is where, as a criminal justice professional or even an academic and scholar, you always want to do more research. There's a lot of good research out there looking at these correlations, and I invite anyone, and this is not the platform that I am going into these types of studies, but they do really support these predispositions, brain chemistry, and the correlated criminal behaviors, some of which I earlier touched on. So how are these really applied to our U.S. criminal justice system? Well, it really does influence the positivist theory does influence the rehabilitation programs for both adults as well as juveniles. I've seen it in the juvenile system where when we really look at, okay, we are dealing with both a biological, chemical, and even some environmental factors that we need to now look at a case plan, a treatment plan, if you will, for what interventions are going to be best suited for this child. It has to be on a case by case basis. And those are going to be addressing any of the underlying causes for the criminal behavior to reduce the recidivism rates. Now, when we look at, say, cases of juveniles, yes, we want to give treatment, therapy, whether it's individual, group. We want to give them the tools and techniques to be able to not only identify their own, but even set them up for success for their own understanding of how to best set habits in a regimen, like going to school, doing well in school, working towards goals. And that even really means to give them awards and rewards for good behaviors, and while not necessarily punishing them for bad behaviors, but rewarding them for the good behaviors. Therefore, not really setting in that everything has a sanction or a punishment, but that they can start to do more rewards because they're going to be doing more positive actions. So when we look at one example of positivist theory application in U.S. criminal justice system is really the use of neurobiological assessments such as brain scans. And this is to inform legal decision-making processes. I'm not going so far as to say that somebody is not competent to stand trial, but what it does is it does gives insight into here is what the individual needs are, not only to, it's not to necessarily punish, it is to actually treat them and help them and understand, when we look at, say, sex offenders, pedophiles, what is needed for them as either positive or negative triggers, what are competent type treatments that will end up changing their behavior. And that could lead to, as we've seen in the past, some medication management. Now let's move on into the Marxist theory of criminology. Now this theoretical framework really offers a critical view of crime, specifically focusing on social inequalities and economic structures. Very different, right, from the positivist theories, which is the biochem, if you will. But the overlapping part is the environmental, which then cross over into the economic structures and the inequalities, the social inequalities. When we start talking about socioeconomics, we start talking about the race, ethnicity. What about the demographic of where somebody lives? Meaning you can live in a city full of people, but it will run the gamut of below poverty level to extremely well off economically, right? Where people don't have to worry, all the way back down to where people barely make do every single day. So here the theory attributes crime to the capitalist societies where ruling classes exploit the working class. I mean, one just has to really read the Marxist-Leninist communist manifestos and really understand the bourgeois class, meaning the working class, that the working class is the one exploiting, the working class is the one oppressing everyone else. And yet it really, even to the point of that it's the elites. So the concept like class struggle, alienation, and the role of laws in upholding elite interests. So recently here in the United States, we could really look towards the last 4 years, especially in 2023 and 2024, with the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli protests on U.S. college campuses. One only has to look very quickly, and you would see the socialist and the Marxist struggle that is going on these campuses. It just isn't a pro Palestinian, anti Semitic, while that religious part is brought in. It was and still continues to be where these individuals who are in their late teens, early 20s, but you do see individuals that are what we would call professional Marxist rebels, but you also see Antifa, the anti fascists, who also believe in a lot of socialist Marxist theoretical frameworks. Really, we're looking at socialist and communism type behaviors and the wants. But yet, do they really know how this is going to affect even them? Most of them don't really understand it. Why? Because look at the colleges and universities these individuals were on. So here's the evidence supporting Marxist theory. Research shows that there's a link between poverty, inequality, and crime rates, and therefore it does validate some of the theory's emphasis on the socioeconomic factors in criminal behavior. Well, we know that. I mean, especially if you look at social learning theory. You look at, well, even if you go back to the philosophy of Rousseau and the social contract, when the social contract is broken and people cannot feed themselves, they will resort to some kind of criminal behavior, whether that's stealing food in order to eat. I mean, you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So in order to live, you have to have shelter, you have to have food. And when you don't have shelter, you want to vie for shelter. When you don't have food, you're going to vie for food. So you look at the socioeconomic. Well, and the Marxist theory posits that, well, if everybody was equal in that they all earned the same amount of money, that no one was above anybody else, that then therefore there would be no crime. Well, in the 50 years that, and even in the 50 years that Russia had its communism, it failed. Even in Venezuela, it failed. There ended up being no equality, no matter how much they tried. You still ended up with individuals in the party having more than the working class. So it just kind of shifted from everybody else and a very small portion, everybody else being low economically, and less than 1% being very well off and not having to worry about food. I mean, you just also have to look at Russia during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and well into the 90s, just after the fall in 1990 of the communism, really around all of Eastern Europe, that you didn't have a lot of, you had more bread lines, you had people starving, you didn't see full grocery stores, so on and so forth. So the recent application are we see policies advocating for reform to address societal issues and contributing to crime, such as economic disparities and social injustices. Look at just how the Democratic Party in the US in just the last 4 years has really advocated for, and one of them is open borders. That American citizens receive less support through, say, such things as Social Security, whereas individuals who immigrate here illegally receive more benefits. You just look at New York City, the tourism, tourists not being able to get hotel rooms yet because it's the federal government made, or even the city of New York made that, well, you're going to house these people. So, you look at, yes, the contributing factors and where is society heading. You have what looks good on paper, especially over the last 4 years, with the current administration having passed all these different bills that seem to say that they're going to help economically distressed people, but they actually don't. They haven't. It's again, people with an administration who has Marxist ideas say they're doing more for the equality, but yet they're not, because it has shown the richer have gotten rich and the poorer have gotten poorer during 2021 through 2024. And that is based on more of the policies, because we've seen these policies in soft on crime over the last 4 years. District attorneys like in California and New York, where they're not punishing individuals for, say, stealing from a Walgreens or a CVS or a Target. They actually explain it away, saying that it's part of reparations. It's alleviating the policy, the poverty by, well, we're not going to even have our police answer a phone call if it's below $750 or below $1,000. So the criminals then are just given that example of, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to throw $750 worth of product in my basket. I'm going to walk out because no police are coming. Security is not allowed to stop me. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sell it for a profit, because, of course, they didn't have to put up anything in perpetuity for that product. So then they glean whatever they get, whether it's $1 or $5, they get that. That's pure profit to them. Well, this is part of the policy of Marxist theory, is that if you let them get away with this, this will actually lead to less crime. But we saw carjackings go up. You saw personal property crimes go up. And then, even on the heels of COVID, when landlords were not allowed to evict tenants who stopped paying rent, it then took that, well, you're the landlord, you own the property, but you still have to make the payments, but you should let people live there for free. And there was a lot of times for a lot of states, California, Nevada, so on and so forth, that the court said, no, we're not hearing any cases. You can't evict them, not until COVID was over. So you have to look at that as part of the theoretical framework of the Marxist theory. Now, you can contrast positivist and Marxist theories. I mean, the positivist theory relies and focuses on biological and psychological factors, while the Marxist theory really does socially, economically, and as well as the structures are the cause of crime. So yes, two very different ones in the effect that there are a little bit of overlaps, right? So the causation with positivist theory, it suggests that criminal behavior is, of course, a biological trait, a psychological condition, and social influences. Whereas when we look at Marxist, it posits that crime arises from societal inequalities, capitalist exploitation, and the struggle for power and resources. So we have to look at the factors influencing criminal behavior as well. The contrast is between individualistic explanations in positivist theory and the structural determinants in Marxist theory, which shape perceptions of criminal causation. Now we have to look at the impact of criminology theories on criminal justice policy. And as I said earlier, you do see that in the last 4 years, we've really seen it. But even if you go back farther, if you go back to the to late 2000s, meaning 2008, 9, and 10, during the Obama administration, we saw some of these changing. And we also saw some of the Marxist perspectives start to shape what we see are criminal justice policies by informing approaches to crime prevention as well as rehabilitation. A lot of criminals now feel, yes, emboldened, because the rehabilitation says that they did not do wrong. They were a victim of their product of society, whether it is that, well, you're not really responsible, you have a biological predisposition. So therefore, take medication, and it's not your fault. But even if they have, if they end up doing it again. Or when we look at the Marxist, that it's not your fault that you were dealt this hand and you haven't done anything to pick yourself up. It's somebody else's fault. Therefore, it's okay for you to do this. And we're seeing that in a lot of the generations here over the last 2 generations. Well, that influence on the policies, we see that, yep, it is the individual psychological factors that contribute to crime, and that is in complete contrast to Marxist theories, which highlight the socioeconomic circumstances. They couldn't help it. They don't make enough money, or they come from a single parent home, or it's based off of ethnicity. We look at the positivist theories that what kind of prevention strategy can be put in place? Well, we see that some targeted interventions are done based on risk factors, whereas the Marxist theories advocate for societal change to address root causes of crime. And while one can be done through policies, the other one seems to be, because you also have to look at Marxist theory, that it's done through violence. It's not done through simple takeover. Through policy changes. It's almost to the point of terroristic threats. It's through, and that is part of the Marxist theory, that, when you look at the Communist Manifesto, there is no discussing it. There is no waiting for the courts to change it. It is done by force, and it is done by the people. So when we look at criminological theories that guide the development of rehabilitation programs, they have to focus on individual level treatment and societal reintegration, and it's depending on the theoretical approach that's going to be adopted. So when we look at criminal profiling, that's one thing that's unveiling some of these theories. And the criminal profiling is part of the harnessing of theories like positivism and Marxism, really to analyze and understand the offender behavior. We've done that now for the last 24 years. We've done that with terrorism. We had to start looking at terrorism from the psychological aspect in order to mitigate, prevent, or deter terrorism. So when we look at utilization of positivist and Marxist concepts, positivist theories really focus on individual traits and behaviors. A lot of this we've already kind of gone over in the previous, so it's kind of just wrapping it up. When we start looking at the criminal profiling techniques, that is one thing to really look at individual characteristics and societal influences. Now I want to make sure that you do have your real life application, and that is by looking at motives and patterns and potential risks, and then therefore what are the safety plans to mitigate risks, so on and so forth. And it's those investigative strategies. It's continuing to contribute to the development of what we can see as effective crime prevention measures and law enforcement practices. A lot of these are done by not only policing, but also by criminal intelligence analysis or crime analysis. And then you have to look at the ethical considerations when we look at both of these theories. When we say, okay, we're criminal profiling. Now, people have, in Western society, specifically here in the U.S., say that any kind of profiling is not fair, it's not transparent, it's actually racist, and it doesn't even have to be towards one specific race, color, or creed. It's even looked at as respect for individual rights and freedoms. So when we look at the critiques and limitations of the theoretical applications, really you can see, yes, there are some oversimplifications, but then there are also the neglect for other important factors. This is where critical thinking comes in from you, the academic. You should really be looking at these from both aspects. and not only making up your own mind, but really relying on the scientific facts. So, what are some of those future trends that are coming in? Well, we have to really start looking at technology and the data analysis and interdisciplinary collaboration. You wouldn't think, well, can psychologists and law enforcement continue to do a lot of research? Yes, it's never ending. Why? Because we have societal issues. We have what we see are evolution of what biological and chemical issues in human criminal behavior. And of course, these are always going to influence the theories. But you're going to see that impact also on criminal justice policies. It's just not by what these theories say, but it's the research that can help shape the policies as well. It gives decision makers supporting evidence, and that's what I always want students to be doing, is looking at what does the evidence say. You can come up with a research question, you can have a hypothesis, but once you conduct that research, what does the research say? Collaborative efforts between researchers and law enforcement and academics is always going to play a vital role. What you are doing in this course is vital. So I want you to make sure that you look at, is there merging theoretical insights with these, with both the positivist and Marxist theories? As I've alluded to, yes, there might be overlaps, but I also think that there could be one day with research looking at and having a merging of these two practical applications in helping improve outcomes and solving and preventing criminal activities. So when we look at challenges and future directions, exploring the current challenges, look at what the research out there has and what it says are limitations. What are the recommendations going forward? And are there potential innovations? We do see that in the pharmaceutical areas, but pharmaceuticals don't really necessarily support and change Marxist theories, but we could see what societal changes are needed out there towards approaches with criminal behaviors. And then we can say the same thing for current challenges in the theories, that there's dynamics, there's technological advancements, and we also have to look at the global criminal activities. We thought terrorism was a global war on terrorism, and we see terrorist organizations around the world. We've seen that for the last 60 years, that terrorist organizations have popped up all over the world. So, and it just isn't constrained to one continent or one country. It ends up affecting more and more countries and more continents, especially when we're in a globalist society through technology like social media. We no longer, have to travel someplace to get to know something. One just has to go on any of the social media platforms. So there is that complexity. Analyzing the eccentricities of criminal behavioral patterns and motivations is always going to present a challenge in predicting as well as preventing criminal activities effectively. So when we look at technological advancements in crime prevention, we have AI, artificial intelligence. We now have predictive analytics. One just needs to do some research on predictive analytics to say that, individual with these afflictions will have the precursors too. But then when we start, it started out in the 1970s and 80s with watching the lyrics and having the parental advisement on albums and CD covers. And then we started seeing that video games, handheld video games, and TV and portable TVs. And then every child had a TV or a gaming device in their room, which then kept them away from society. So we started to see a lot of antisocial behaviors. Even now, we see even more antisocial behaviors, as well as everything from cyberbullying and depression, because with the bullying, of course, you have the body shaming and so on and so forth, and the influences that social media as well as electronic devices provide. So, what are some of the future criminological research that should be out there? We can see utilizing big data analytics, neuroscience advancements, and interdisciplinary collaborations. This is where I would implore with you that maybe you, as an academic, would start to look at, well, what kind of neuroscience advancements are out there to prove this theory, um, improving it or disproving it. So I want you to have that understanding of not only these two theories, but start to go down the rabbit hole of other theories and start writing down what other theories. And we've discussed other theories here in just this presentation. So I want you to look at what insights can you gain from the causes of crime, and then what kind of shaping of modern criminal justice systems would you be able to offer if you had some better understanding and research behind these. So remember, for the third time now, we look at positivist theories as focusing on the biological, psychological, and sociological factors. And then Marxist is that socioeconomic structures as the root causes of criminal behaviors. And then how can these things be integrated? That holistic understanding of crime, and really being able to pick apart when you find a suspect who is say a career or lifelong criminal. Can you be able to say it's more of the positivist theory or the Marxist theory based on their case alone? And what kind of interventions would have possibly changed this individual's life had it been caused early and the theoretical framework been applied? So I can see where now we're enhancing the criminal justice systems, incorporating these diverse theoretical perspectives in policies that promotes comprehensive approaches to crime prevention and the rehabilitation efforts. Thank you so much for your attention in this presentation. Take care. This is Dr. Russo.